Hi, my name is Jackie, and today I'm going to give a book talk on two fantasy novels. One is a classic and one is a contemporary. I'm a big fan of fantasy, so it made sense for me to choose two books of this genre. My classic book is The Hobbit, and my contemporary book is A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with The Hobbit. The Hobbit is by J.R.R. Tolkien, and it was published in 1937. My copy is about 279 pages, so it's not necessarily long, and the font is a pretty good size, not too small, not too big. So I'll start off with the summary. The Hobbit follows a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins. He lives in the Shire at his home at Bag End, and he lives alone, and he lives like most hobbits do. They don't really do much. They enjoy sitting around and smoking on his tobacco pipe and eating and just relaxing. They aren't adventurers, and as far as we know, or as far as the reader knows, he's never left the Shire, and who knows how far into the Shire, how far he has gone. So Bilbo is at home one day when he's visited by an old friend named Gandalf. And Gandalf is a wizard. He hasn't seen him in a while, but Gandalf shows up at his house and he asks Bilbo to go on an adventure. And of course Bilbo says no. That's not what hobbits do. He's fine not going. So he thinks he got away with it until the next day. All of a sudden he has 13 dwarves and a wizard sitting in his home, and they're eating his food and they're drinking, and he doesn't really understand what's going on. So finally, after all of this merriment, they get down to the business, and he finds out that the dwarves want to go back to their home, Lonely Mountain, where their ancestors lived. And hundreds of years ago, it was taken over by a dragon named Smaug, and they want to get back there to get all of the treasure and to get everything they left behind. So they plan on hiring Bilbo as a burglar or kind of an expert treasure hunter. And of course Bilbo does not want to go. He's already told Gandalf, and that's not what he wants to do. So he freaks out a little bit, and he says he'll think about it overnight and he'll let them know in the morning. So the next morning he wakes up and nobody's there, and he thinks at first it's a dream until he finds all of the dirty dishes, and he realizes that it actually happened, and he was lucky enough to be able to scrape by without having to go, and he thinks that he's okay. Until, as he's eating his breakfast, Gandalf shows up again, and suddenly, very quickly, he's whisked away to the tavern where he's on an adventure that he didn't even want to go on. And the company is consisted of 13 dwarves, Frodo, and Gandalf. And together they set off to Lonely Mountain. And along the way, they come across a lot of mini adventures that have a really big impact on the plot, and they have a really big impact on the end. So they're really important, and it's kind of typical of mini adventures on your big adventure, something happens along the way. And it's also really important for getting across, or else you would kind of be at the Shire, hear them travel, and suddenly they would make it to the end. So it's important there too. But for the mini adventures, they find elves and goblins. There's creatures called wargs, which are kind of wolf-like creatures. And you see some familiar faces. For anyone who has seen or read Lord of the Rings, Gollum is there too. So through these mini adventures, they finally make it to the mountain and the dragon, and I don't want to spoil it, so you'll have to read to see what happens there. So a few characters, or a lot of characters, since Tolkien has just a slew of different characters in this book. We have Bilbo, of course. He's about 50 years old, so he's not really old for a hobbit. In the Lord of the Rings, they mention that when Frodo was 20, he hasn't reached 30, which is when you're considered an adult. So at 50 years old, he obviously isn't too old, but he's not a kid anymore. And of course, he likes living at his home in Bag End. He is just really content being there. And then we have Gandalf, who's a wizard, who is he's the sage of the group. He really is the wise one who leads them. He knows everything. He knows where they need to go and why they need to do things. And he is the one who he leads the group. Thorin is the leader of the dwarves, but Gandalf is the leader of the group. And he saves them time and time again. And he really wants them to start learning how to be dependent on themselves and seeing what Bilbo has to offer. So, and the other thing about Gandalf is he's also very, I don't want to say whimsical, but there's something about him that's fun and exciting, and he's definitely a great wise wizard, but he's also a really enjoyable character. And then we have the dwarves, and there's 13 dwarves, and there's Thorin Oakenshield, Dori, Nori, Ori, Balin, Dwalin, Fili, Kili, Ori, Gloin, Bifur, Bofer, and Bombur. So I had to write it down. I knew them, but I knew it was going to be like Snow White when you can't list off all the dwarves, and then you go crazy when you're trying to find which one you missed. So those are the dwarves, and you don't see too much of them. One thing about this book is you have a lot of characters. I mean, there's a lot of mini characters on top of the main characters, like Bjorn and Bard and Elrond, who you meet. So you have a lot of characters, and especially in the company, when it comes to the dwarves, there's only a couple who you can place. Thorin, of course, Balin, Fili, Kili, and Bombur are probably the ones who are easiest to remember. Bombur mostly just because he's really big and fat, and most of the time he's having trouble keeping up or doing whatever it is that they need him to do. So you don't get a lot of the dwarves, or at least you don't get their individual characters. So a lot of characters, and even though you don't get that focus, they're really interesting characters. Even the bad guys, such as the High Goblin, he's not in it for very long, but you see a lot of goblins. The wargs, which are wolves, like just the creativity of the fantasy characters themselves, they're really great. And you can definitely see the influence that he took from the real world and put into the book. The writing style for the book, I really enjoyed the way the story was written. It felt a lot like Tolkien was telling you the story directly. Like, I just pictured him for some reason in this big armchair, being a little kid, just sitting there listening to him talk about this time before now, that when the world wasn't ancient and men lived with elves and dwarves and hobbits and goblins and just all of these things. So you really get this Tolkien telling you the story. So it's not typical writing, and it's not first person, but you definitely can feel like he's there telling you the story. Another thing that the book has a lot of is descriptions. It's really impossible to get away from the descriptions. Tolkien describes everything. Some people are going to enjoy that, some people aren't. I really liked it because I felt like Middle-earth was coming to life with his descriptions. You know, Mirkwood, where it's dark and it's dangerous and you don't really want to be there, or The Last Homey Home, I believe it's called, where Elrond lives, and it's warm and it's fun and you really enjoy it, and the mountains and the valleys and these caves. You definitely get a lot out of the descriptions, and they really add to the story, and there's a lot of them, so you can't get away from them, but I really think they're important to what's happening, and especially the visual that they create. Another thing which adds to the story are the poems, songs, and riddles. I wasn't expecting there to be so many poems, songs, and riddles, but I'm pretty sure everyone in Middle-earth has a song. So you get a lot of that, and they're really great in adding fun to the story. You, of course, sing the songs in your head, and I probably sing them incorrectly every time, but you definitely can get enjoyment out of seeing these things. And Golems, and so are Bilbo's riddles, are really creative and they're really good. They pretty much got me every time, so maybe you'd get them. But they definitely add to the story. So the description and the riddles and the way the story is written, it's really easy to get into it. So you have the mini adventures, and you have the characters and the plot and all that. Some themes for the book. One of the themes is personal growth, and this is definitely prevalent in Bilbo, which some of that is because, again, he's the character that we see more of. He grows from this character that just is like, no, I don't want to be on an adventure, I want to go home, I want to go back to Bag End, to suddenly he's saving the day, which is another theme, is this reluctant hero, heroism, what makes you a hero, and he grows so much from being that at-home hobbit to just being this adventurer and to really stepping outside of his bounds, which is a really, I think, something that Tolkien is telling you as the reader, is that sometimes you need to step outside and really do something that you didn't think you could in order to grow as a person. So the personal growth and the heroism are really big in this book, definitely in Bilbo. I think if you were to look hard enough, you could probably see it in everybody else. I would say that the dwarves definitely learned to rely on Bilbo a lot more, versus in the beginning they really didn't trust him. He wasn't a burglar anyways, but they definitely could see that he wasn't. But as it goes on, you can see, especially characters like Balin, one of the dwarves, he really comes to help Bilbo and believe in Bilbo, and so there's that little bit of growth. So, of course, I would have to mention that it was made into a movie. It's actually been made into 2 movies. In 1977, it was made into an animated film. And if I can find a link for something, maybe I'll put that in there. I think I saw one where Bilbo finds the ring, and so it's Gollum. So I'll put a link in the description box so you can see. And then more recently, last year, the first installment of the trilogy of The Hobbit was released. And I will say I saw it last year and I loved it. And I hadn't read the book yet. I actually just finished this yesterday. So when I was reading this, I was having a few times I did say I don't remember this happening that way in the movie, so I think it's important to note that the movie is an adaptation, and I don't think that the movie takes away from The Hobbit. I mean, obviously it adds things, and there's things removed, and things are changed around, but it also does a really great job of bringing Tolkien's story to life, and maybe things that he didn't think to add, but really add to the story, or just the scenery itself is beautiful. So I definitely think that the movie, compared to the book, you are going to get differences, which I think anytime you have a movie and a book, it's never going to be perfect, but it definitely is a great adaptation of this. And of course the next one comes out in December, so hopefully you'll maybe see the first one if you haven't, and read the book and see what you think. For young adults, I think that's one thing about The Hobbit that's really great, is that it can span any age group. It doesn't matter how old you are or how young you are, you can read The Hobbit and really enjoy it. So for a young adult, I think it's great. I think you can be older or younger, it doesn't matter. A young adult will, I guess it doesn't matter what age group, because it's just the fantasy and the story. Everyone can learn from it and everyone can enjoy it. So any age group can enjoy this Hobbit. It was really good. I recommend it to anyone. If you haven't read it and maybe you've been thinking about it and you like fantasy, I think you can really enjoy it. So that's The Hobbit. The next book that I'll talk about is my contemporary book, and that is A Great and Terrible Beauty by Libba Bray. This was published in 2003. I read it when I was 18, so about 7 years ago. So I reread it, and I loved it again. But let me talk a bit about it. Where The Hobbit is a pure fantasy novel, I would say that this novel kind of has an extra genre in there. You have fantasy, but you also have a bit of historical fiction, and you have a little bit of a mystery. So it's definitely overall fantasy, but you can enjoy the other little things in it. A Great and Terrible Beauty is the first book in the Gemma Doyle series, and it's followed by Rebel Angels, and then Sweet Far Thing. This one hadn't come out when I got the series. I think originally I got the series, I picked them up at Barnes & Noble because of the covers. I was going through I liked the pictures. So I picked it up, read the back, and I loved it, and so then I read it. The book takes place in 1895, and it starts in India, and we begin with Gemma Doyle, who's our main character, and it's her birthday. She just turned 16, and she's in the market with her mother and her nanny, and she's having a temper tantrum. She wants to go to England, where her grandmama is telling her about balls and society and just all this high life things that she wants to experience, but her mother does not want her to go. So they're arguing about what's happening. You know, her mom wants her to stay and Gemma wants to go, and suddenly 2 men come out of the marketplace and talk to her mother, and one of them is older and one of them is about Gemma's age, and suddenly her mom gets scared, and Gemma doesn't know what's going on, but she knows that it's bad. And in appeasement to get her daughter to go home, her mother gives Gemma her necklace, which is a crescent moon, and Gemma knows what's happening, and she knows that her mother is putting her down and sending her home, and she throws a temper tantrum, and runs away. And she's kind of lost in the market, and she realizes what mistakes she made, and so she needs to go back. And suddenly she has a vision, and in her vision she sees her mother and the older gentleman killed by this creature that she doesn't know. She doesn't know what it is. So she's really scared by this vision, and she panics. The book then goes forward, and she's in England with her brother. And she's on her way to be sent to Spence Academy. And Spence Academy is a finishing school, so it's where girls would go to learn how to be the perfect hostess and the perfect wife. So they learn how to sing and speak French and dance and draw and embroider, just everything that prepares them for the high society life. And here she has trouble because she lived in India where this didn't happen. So she's trying to navigate her life through here. She meets 3 girls who soon, or I shouldn't say soon, but over time become her friend. And at the same time, she's trying to deal with these visions and trying to figure out what they mean. So a lot of the historical fiction comes from her trying to survive in this world and learn about this world, and at the same time trying to see what these visions mean, which you find out throughout the mystery of the part of the novel, what's going on. The characters in the book, well, there's Gemma Doyle, 16. She has trouble in England because she grew up in India. She doesn't have that same society look or that same outlook on what's happening. She even points out to her brother at one point, mother was father's equal. To which, of course, he replies, of course, that's what happened, that's why she died, because he's been in England for so long and he can see why women are less, and she just doesn't get it. So she fights a lot with what this means and why she can't be the way that she wants to be. And then on top of this, she has her visions, and she's kind of trying to figure them out, and she doesn't quite understand them. And then there's Felicity Worthington, and Felicity is an admiral's daughter. She's very power hungry. She definitely doesn't get the patriarchal society. She tries to fit into it, and she looks like she fits into it, but you can tell that there's more to what she wants. Her family is broken, which you find out in the story what's going on with that. So she has this vulnerability of wanting to see her family because she hasn't seen them in so long. But at the same time, she's building up that vulnerability and what happened to her into creating this just powerful person and this powerful girl, and she leads everybody. Everybody wants to impress Felicity, and you want to make her like you. Then there is Anne Bradshaw, and Anne is actually the first girl that Gemma meets because she's her roommate, and Anne is what's called a scholarship student. And a scholarship student means that she's there not of the same level as the other girls. So for Anne, her parents died and her family didn't want to take care of her. So she's sent to Spence Academy so she can gain an education to be a governess to their children. So she can't get in trouble. If she gets in trouble, she loses everything. So she's definitely tries to be a goody-goody, while at the same time trying to impress people with who she is. She's often bullied, both mentally and physically, by the other girls, mostly because of Felicity, because of her class, because she is lower than them. So they treat her very badly. So she also stays invisible so that people don't see her. Her goal is her dream is that somebody which will come and save her, and she holds on to this throughout the story. The last girl that they meet is Pippa, and Pippa Cross is Felicity's second. She's not as power hungry as Felicity, but she likes being on top. She's the most beautiful girl there. They all know how beautiful she is, and that she gets attention from everybody because of how pretty she is. She's engaged to a man named Bartley Bimble, who's about 50 years old, so quite a bit older than her, but he wants her because of her beauty, and she kind of dreams of having a knight in shining armor and finding true love because she knows she can't have it. All the girls also have a secret, which I think is really interesting you kind of have to read to find them out. Some of them are figured out in the first book, and some of them go on throughout the trilogy. So you see what happens, but they all have a secret, and they all try to overcome it and, you know, share with each other. Some other characters, which are kind of the minor characters, you get teachers, Miss Moore. There's a girl named Mary Dowd and Sarah Reese Toombs, and then one minor character is Kartik. And Kartik is the young gentleman who is in the beginning of the book, and he follows Gemma to England, and he lives out with the gypsies, but he's always watching Gemma, and he comes to warn her to stop her against using her visions and to generally threaten her into not doing that. He doesn't have necessarily as big a role in the first book. You can kind of see who he is and what's going on, but as the series continues, he gets a more and more important role. So he's definitely someone to watch out for when you read the book. Some themes for the book, well, one of them is self-discovery. These girls are 16, so they're kind of at that age where they try to figure out who they are and what's going on. Of course, it's harder in the society that they live in, but because all of them do not want to fit into this society, they are all trying to discover themselves and what's going on. So there's a lot of self-discovery in what's happening, especially with them because they are ones who are fighting against what's happening. Another theme is friendship. These girls all come from different places, different levels, different classes, and they still come together to create a really great friendship that makes sense. Libba Bray does a great job of making it so that the friendship that they form happens for a reason, and it happens in a way that's, to me, believable. So self-discovery and friendship are probably the two biggest themes of this book. The writing style, it's really good. Libba does a great job at catching you and bringing you into the story. It is the first book in a series, so the first half of the book you're going to get a lot of setting up the story and setting up the characters and the setting, and, you know, really just trying to make sure you have a build up to what's going to happen. The second half is just pure action. You know, you definitely get kind of thrust into it, and you're there with them and to figure out what's going on. So it's not a very long book. It's about 403 pages, and the font is pretty good. Hopefully you can tell. So it's a pretty decent sized font. It's definitely bigger than The Hobbit, so it's not that hard to get into. The writing is believable. It's really draws you in. Every chapter ends with a cliffhanger, which is great, but also disappointing when you need to put the book down. It is a young adult book, so I would definitely say it's probably best for young adults. I think everyone likes reading different things, so I can't say only young adults, because you could be older, you could be younger and really get into it. But I can see why it's made for young adults, and I think young adult girls, mostly just because of the characters, would enjoy it most. You don't need to know anything about history to read it, just because it has historical fiction in it. Libba Bray describes what you need to know. She tells you what you need, so there's definitely no backstory needed or anything like that. A really good book. I loved it. It's one of my favorites. As I said, it's the first one, and it's followed by Rebel Angels and A Sweet Far Thing in the trilogy. So 3 books. All of them are pretty good size. This one is the shortest. It's very not hard to read. Very great. So those are my 2 books. There was my classic, The Hobbit, and my contemporary, A Great and Terrible Beauty. I hope you maybe were interested in either of these books and decide you want to read them, or you decide you don't want to read them. But either way, thank you for listening to me.